Gentlemen, welcome to TechGig webinar, our endeavor to empower techies. We believe that sharing this knowledge is the key of enhancing our performances and for our growth as professionals. With this principle in mind, TechGig has initiated a series of webinars conducted by industry experts to give a crisp insight of various domains. Today's session is second in the Tech Leadership series, and topic for today's webinar is 10 Mistakes of My Career. We are delighted to have Mr. Krishnan Natarajan, Vice President, Product Marketing, ThoughtWorks Studios, as our guest speaker today. Mr. Krishnan leads Product Marketing at ThoughtWorks Studios. His focus is on working with customers to identify important problems and help design solutions that address them. Mr. Krishnan has extensive experience in both product management and product marketing. Gentlemen, this presentation will continue for next 45 minutes and we will take your questions after the presentation. In the meanwhile, you can post your queries through the chat pane available in the webinar software. Without further ado, I introduce you to our guest speaker, Mr. Krishnan.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to be here at this event. For this afternoon sessions, first of all, thank you for taking the time to attend. What we wanted to do was reflect on some of the career mistakes throughout my career and use this as learning experiences and opportunities for you to learn from. Many of these mistakes I have made personally, and several I have seen close colleagues or friends make as well. What we hope is that by learning from these experiences, you can more effectively manage your career. In terms of the agenda for this afternoon, what we are going to do is present these topics in the form of a top 10 list. And what we'll do is provide a theme as well as an example to understand the theme. The topics are presented in no particular order, and what we'll do is also have ample opportunities for questions and answers. So we'll have one question and answer session in the middle of the session, and we'll have a final Q&A right at the end. So at this point, let me just check that my audio level is proper and we can get started.
Yes,
my first career mistake that I made was always listening to my manager. And I'm not advocating that you don't listen to your manager. I think it's very important to listen and work with your manager. But you should also recognize and be proactive in your communications. One of the things that is very important to recognize is that in many cases, your manager may not always articulate what is expected. And this is particularly the case when your manager is new or when you're coming into a new role. And this situation can lead to breakdowns in communication with some potential negative impacts. So as an example, I had an experience earlier in my career where I transitioned to a new manager who came in to take over from my previous manager. And what I assumed was that I could talk to him directly and get his feedback on what I should be doing and deliver on those items. So I carefully, from him, periodically got his list of action items, his list of objectives. I made sure that I consistently delivered on all of those, and I got his feedback that I had delivered on those. And this happened for many months. Then during the annual review process, when we sat down to evaluate performance, I got very surprised in that I got a very average review. It was not as high as many of my peers, and I was very disappointed. So I had a discussion with my manager and asked for specific reasons. And what he said was, he said, look, no particular reason, you've done everything I've asked. But he said, what I've seen others do is really go above and beyond and take the initiative. And what he said was that many of my peers had done things that were not asked for and were not expected of them, but which were surprises, positive surprises to the manager and for which they were rewarded. So my big lesson and takeaway from this is that very often managers will have expectations. And being human, they do not always articulate or clearly describe what those expectations are. And so one must be very careful to not only listen to what you're told, but also to ask what is not told, provide consistent communication and feedback, and in that way truly understand what the real expectations are and make sure that you deliver and exceed those. Second career mistake I made, and I've seen others make this, and this is a very important point, is not following your passion. You know, early in our careers, we have certain perspectives on what would be a good career, what would be very lucrative, what would be very rewarding. And one of the things we should realize is that we all have certain passions about certain things, and our career choices may not map to those areas of passion. These are areas that excite us, that interest us, where we really are enthused by pursuing. And very often what happens is that we make career choices that are based on other reasons. It may not be subjects we're interested in, but we believe it's a good opportunity, and for whatever reason we pursue those directions. Over my career and over the past many years, what I found is that many people are more satisfied professionally by really doing the things they're passionate about. So I think there's an interesting example here that I'm very happy to share. Many years ago in my career, I had a choice. I was changing jobs, and I had a choice between accepting two offers. One was an established company, one was a startup company. The established company was very attractive, very stable, but really in an area that did not particularly excite me. It was a good position, but not really my area of excitement or enthusiasm. Another one was with a startup company. Much more risk, a lot more speculative career decision, but in an area which to me was really interesting and exciting and one I wanted to pursue. So one of the things that I looked at was in making this choice is what should I do? And my thought here was to get feedback from various people. Originally I had been leaning towards the established company, but what I recognized in talking to my colleagues, and we discussed on a lot of points, what I really recognized was that I had to look and find where my passion and interests were and pursue those. I think the compelling thing was when he stopped me in the middle of our discussion, when we were discussing these choices, and he said, "But Krishnan, where's your passion?" And that really helped me think through the issues. The next point, the third point, which is on really the related issue relative to hiring people or relative to passion, is really in terms of hiring. Many of us at some point in our career will be in the role of either interviewing candidates or making hiring decisions. And we have a similar decision point in terms of, do we hire people for passion? And one of the ways I like to describe it is to hire the mercenaries, to hire the missionaries rather than mercenaries. And the mistake I made in the past is hiring people who have expressed an interest in the role, but not really looking at, do they have the passion and drive and ambition for the role? This issue comes up a lot in hiring. And one of the things that is important to say is that it is really critical to hire people that are motivated by passion rather than by money or some perceived notion of what the role will be. The people that are the real missionaries, those that have the passion and the interest and the drive, they're going to go the extra mile. They're going to put in the additional commitment. They're not going to look at extra commitment as a chore. They're going to look at it as something they're excited about. They have a greater purpose than the specific job. And I really refer to them as missionaries. They're willing to evangelize. They're willing to go into uncharted areas to really explore, develop their careers. And in the past, where I've done this right, I've always thought of hiring the people who have the missionaries rather than mercenaries. Right? And the missionaries are those that really are motivated by the desire to change, want to cause a change, and really the mercenaries have a different perspective where they're just here for a job. The other related issue on hiring is really this entire trade-off between, do I hire for competence or do I hire for cultural fit? And I've made the mistake in the past of hiring for competence. And very often this is the criteria in many interviews, is that we look for, does this person have this particular skill, this particular background, and we hire for that in terms of competence. That's definitely important. I'm not underestimating the value of that. But what I'm also saying is that it's not the only criteria. We should just as importantly and just as significantly look at the cultural fit. Because the reality is that there are many smart people in the world, there are many competent people in the world, and in many cases the competence can be developed. But what is really difficult and challenging is to change values that fit with the organizational culture. Right? People can get the competence and they can gain the skills, but very difficult in most cases to change their values. So when I've discussed this with my peers, I get very strong agreement. Right? And what they have seen and what I have seen over many the course of many interviews and hiring decisions is that they can think of a situation where they had employees who had the competences, the right skills, but really weren't a cultural fit and did not fit in well in the organization and ultimately did not have productive careers. To summarize, key lesson here is let's hire for competence, let's hire for cultural fit rather than competence. Competence is one dimension, but not the exclusive dimension. The final point I'll make in this first part is that very often in our careers we think about the challenges and frustrations in the current role. We find that there are other possibilities out there, and we think that the grass is greener. This is the metaphor for opportunities outside our current situation. And this can very often look attractive to us. Right? We all encounter challenging situations in the career. In some cases, we are faced with the choice of do we want to stay or leave for another company. Look around, and very often what we find is that other opportunities look very attractive. They don't have the issues in your current situation, and for that reason they look tempting. But my advice to you in this situation is that this is really a false expectation. Whenever you look at something that is new, it's very natural from a human viewpoint just to see the positives and not really to have a balanced view of what your current situation is, which may also have positives. So the thing that is new looks very positive. You very often do not see or are not told about the negatives in the situation. Your current situation, you tend to see a lot of the negatives, and so it's really an unbalanced view. So what I suggest in this case is it's much better to address what is not working in the current environment, address those factors, try and improve your current situation, and I think overall you might be better off in your career for doing all of those. So those are my first 5 lessons. What I wanted to do is pause here and take some questions, and then continue with the second part of the discussion, and we could take some further questions at the end. Okay, let me just take a look at the first question here. In case you're not able to see it on the screen, I'll read it out for you. It says, hello, I have a question. I have 5+ years experience in a single company, and I've worked here in multiple domains, but since I have not switched jobs, the salary is below IT standards. Do you think I've done a mistake by staying in one company for this long, or is it better to switch companies on a regular interval? So I think the basic question here is a common one that I've heard in many cases. And what I would suggest is, think about it in a balanced perspective. The first point is regarding salary competitiveness, and I think that is really indicative of a discussion you should have with your manager, really to, in a very appropriate and dignified but direct way, point this out, that if you have any strong data, get them to consider the fact that yes, you are not being paid relative to current standards. Try and influence them. What I would not do is make any threats here, because I think it's counterproductive. And in some cases, I think if there is a honest agreement with your manager, they might agree and they can take some remediation steps to get you on the current salary track. And I would always advocate, take that first step, try and have that in a very positive way, capture all your contributions and why you believe you're adding a value to the company, get their feedback, and then see if they could not adjust your salary. Ultimately, if you've tried that and it does not work in the long term, then you may have to think about switching. Let me take the next question. What if family and commitments come in a way when we have to select in between passion and a job? This is a very difficult one to answer in general. I think it really comes to one's priorities in life. All I can talk about is my own personal priorities, which is that my family comes in very high. And in fact, in many cases I can think of, I've made very significant career contribution, I've taken choices which are not the best for my career, really in order to satisfy certain family commitments. But that's my personal choice. I've seen other people who have put their career first. All I would encourage you to do is think about long term, 10, 15 years from now, where do you want to be in terms of your trade-off between career and your family commitments, and how do you want to balance that? Let me move on to a different question here. which is, what if your manager is asking you to get involved in a project where you will not get to explore your full potential? At the same time of review, you know you will get an average rating. How to handle those situations? I think you need to take a balanced approach here. Part of being valued in a role is being valued as a team player. Very often what you want to do may not be your personal desire, but is something that you know is for the better of the company. What I would suggest here as an approach is, have that discussion with your manager. If you have that close communication, I think you should be able to have this discussion and really point out the fact that, look, I'm happy to do this. However, I would like to expand out my career in the long term. I also recognize that in certain situations you have to do what's important for the betterment of the company, and I'm willing to take on the role. So balance it out, point out that you are in fact willing to take on this specific responsibility, but also making it clear that you would like to expand the role beyond this. And what I found is that in many cases, a good manager will honor this commitment. But the other thing to realize, as I pointed out in the beginning, is in many cases we all have to do things which are for the better of the company, which may not be our personal first choice. And sometimes we just have to do that, recognizing that what is more valuable in the long term is really being recognized as a strong team player. Let me just take a couple of questions and then I'll get on to the second part of our discussion. So in reading this question, hiring is from the employer side. How as an employee can we identify that we are a cultural fit in the company? I think this is something you need to spend time during the interview process. And there are many indicators here that could give you an insight. You could ask, for example, what does this company do in terms of providing for situations where employees need to take time off for family commitments? It gives you a sense of whether the company really values family and supports employees in terms of family. You can ask them about their benefits, what they provide in terms of a scope for training that gives you an idea of their commitment to their people. You can very often find, through a network, you might be able to find people who are current or past employees of that company. So what I would suggest is, ask a lot of questions during the interview, look for a lot of signs. I mean, the things I look for when I go into a company are things simply as, are there open workspaces where people are interacting, or is everybody in an office? That gives a sense of the culture. What do they do in terms of benefits and providing for support of the employees, asking those specific questions. Talking to former employees of that company or current employees of that company that you know through your own network. All of these can be very good indications. So the next question here is, how can you compare your 0.5 with the new opportunity? This is a difficult one, and I think my point in making point number 5 is that don't always assume that the new opportunity is better. What I found in many times in the past is what happens is that people assume that it is better, and then what they do is they just sort of blindly pursue the new opportunity. What I would suggest is step back, try and get yourself some time and opportunity to look at the situation in perspective. Absolutely make sure that you do a lot of due diligence on the new opportunity to find out, is it really greener, right? Are there any other issues in the new opportunity? What are the set of trade-offs you expect to make? So don't be hasty, take a balanced view, and in many cases it might be the new opportunity is better, but all I'm suggesting here is make it from a balanced viewpoint with complete diligence. Okay, let me just take the next question. What is meant by reverse mentoring? Interesting question, because I don't think I've ever heard this one before. But I think, managers that I've worked with who have really been excellent managers in the past really have this perspective is they are willing to take feedback from 360 degrees, which means they're taking feedback from above. Most of us do that. The really great managers take feedback from their peers, and the exceptional ones take feedback from the people that work for them. And in fact, I've worked with many managers in the past who are actually very actively soliciting my input on certain topics. They're not assuming they know all the answers. In fact, the really excellent managers and the exceptional ones recognize that they are not the domain experts. Their job is not to be the domain experts, and They should listen to the experts and the subordinates on their team. And all I'm saying is that a hallmark of an exceptional manager is when they ask you for feedback and guidance, then it's really an indication that they're exceptional, and I would suggest try and get as close to them as possible. Good. Let me just take a couple more questions and then I'll continue with the presentation. So the question here is that I have been passed over for promotion simply because I was not looking at the project where an appraisal was done. Should I take a look at switching between jobs? So the question here is a difficult one to answer in general. What I would suggest is take a balanced view of the situation. Try some things first in terms of highlighting your contributions, highlighting what you've contributed to other projects if there is anything that you've done there. Make sure that your contribution is recognized. Try and get acknowledgement of recognition of your contribution. And if that is still the case, then I suggest you should look at switching a job. But first of all, try these other things first before taking that big jump to switch jobs. Good. So what I think I'll do now is just continue with the rest of the items, and then we can continue with the questions. So actually, this is a very good point. I think the previous question really came to point number 6, which is the situation of what do we do when we're in a situation and we want to actually leave and go to and get a better salary and promotion. I think there are different ways to do it. The career mistake, I think, is to threaten to leave to do this. And I think this is very short-sighted for a number of reasons. And I've seen this in my career several times. Colleagues have threatened to leave either to get a promotion or higher salary. In some cases it's worked because they might have a very critical skill set. They might be in a very critical role or a critical time in the project, and they wind up getting it because it's a business decision that is made. However, I think it's unadvisable for really 2 major reasons. One is people are going to find out. In a company, this situation leaks out. People will come to learn about it. The consequence is you'll get a lot of resentment from colleagues. And I've seen this happen. There's a lot of resentment from peers and your colleagues because they say, oh, listen, I've done my work, but this other person has threatened and has got the benefit. Why should I support them? It creates a lot of resentment, and it can have the potential of damaging working relationships with your peers. This is something that you should be very careful about. These are all big issues, and they could affect you in the long term. So issue number 1 is, it could damage your relationships with your colleagues. A second thing is it could have a long-term impact on your career as well. Your current managers who agreed to this salary or promotion, in the future, maybe in a situation where you're not as valuable or you're not as critical to the role, and they may decide that, hey, look, I don't want to give you the support you were asking for, but help you develop your career because I view you as somebody who's an opportunistic, just looking out for themselves. And at some time in your career, at some point, when you need the support of your managers, you may find it's not there. You'll remember the behavior and it may work against you. So I don't think in general this is a good thing to do. I would very strongly advise against it. The next one, point number 7, is one of how people perceive promotions. The typical view that many people have is, okay, we're going to be promoted, and then when I get promoted, I'll take on new responsibilities, and I'll just worry about taking on the new responsibilities when I get promoted. So this is very interesting, and it works that's an interesting perspective. It works in many cases. But I've seen an alternate situation, and I've seen people be very effective in getting promotions by doing the following. And that is, take the initiative to fulfill responsibilities beyond your current role. Take a look at what are areas I could do that are at a higher level of responsibility or seniority. Discuss it with your current manager. See if you can identify scope for doing those. Identify solutions, find problems, develop solutions for them, discuss it with your manager, see if they'll give you the opportunity to act on those. And what this does is it demonstrates initiative, it demonstrates the capacity to take on a broader role, and in the long run, it's actually resulted in people getting promoted. So the suggestion here is, think of it the other way around. Think of yourself acting in the more senior role, and then the actual promotion following. And in many cases, I think what you'll find is that if you start to think about issues that are relevant at your manager's level, make appropriate suggestions, you'll be perceived as somebody that is a natural fit for that role, and it makes you a much stronger candidate for that position and for that promotion. Next career mistake that I've seen made very often is thinking that you can do it alone. This is, I think, natural for many of us in that we think that, look, we've got the skills, we've got the competences, we can do it all alone, we don't need feedback or help. It's a big mistake. I've made this mistake personally in my own career, and that was not really recognizing the value of building out your network that can help you. You know, the situation is that ultimately we'll all come to a point in our careers where we need help and guidance. We are going to need help in addressing certain problems, in completing certain projects. We're not going to have the skills and competences, and we need to go out and ask others for that help and guidance. That's the times where your networks become valuable. And your ability to go to your colleagues and peers, ask for their help, will make you successful. But the reality is that you can only take advantage of the network once they've been built, right? And the best time to build a network is when you don't need it. And so what my suggestion is, build out your networks all the time. Go to events where you can interact with your peers, work, social sites like LinkedIn to build out your networks. Become very active, start to identify people who you can work with and who can work with you. Do this on an ongoing basis. Cultivate that circle of contacts, both inside and outside your company, who can give you career guidance and support. And then what you'll find is that when you do need their help and support, they'll be in place because you've already built a relationship. So with networks, think about first building the relationship and then tapping into the network. The next topic I want to discuss is really that people forget very often that really a career is a process of continuous learning. In many cases, what people think is, look, it's just a question, I've gone to college, I've developed my skills, I may be taking some training classes, and then I go into industry, and then I just work. The point is that the technology in our industry changes very rapidly. And very often, what you've learned is obsolete very quickly. And in these days, really as never before in history, it's really critical to engage in continuous learning. The rate of change in our industry is so high, it's really critical to stay current. I mean, many years ago I realized that the half-life or the longevity of what we learn, typically less than 5 years, right? So in a period of 10 or 15 years, most of what you've learned in a training class or in a college is not very useful. It's become obsolete. So you really do need to invest the time and energy to be continually learning, and to keep current and keep your skills, sharp. This is very critical. My final point, which might be contrary or paradoxical, is really this question of experience. And my perspective on this might be contrarian, but I think one of the big mistakes we make is overestimating the value of experience. Now, in general, I agree experience is valuable. There are certain things you will learn that you will not learn in an academic environment. But the question is whether we really want to assess whether the experience is new. And what we very often find is that what we think are new experiences are just existing experiences repeated. So a good lesson here I learned actually from my father, and he would interview a lot of candidates, and one thing he would ask them is how much experience they had. And most people answer that question and they'll talk about their experiences. What they'll say is, yeah, I had 15 years of experience, I had 20 years of experience, and they'll talk about all the experiences. And he'd listen quietly. And then he'd come back and say, all right, so is your experience really 10 years, or is it 2 years repeated 5 times? And what he found is a lot of people stumbled on this question because they hadn't thought through the issue of, am I really doing something new, and am I gaining new experiences, or am I just repeating, doing the same thing over and over again? So what I'd suggest is, as you think about managing your career, think about is my experience really new or is it repetitive? Have I learned something? Am I demonstrating a new skill? Have I broadened my horizon of knowledge? Always strive to have new experiences, and I think that will benefit you in your career. So at this point, I'd like to thank you. This is really the discussion, all the discussion points I had. What I'll just do is take some questions for some more time, and then we can wrap up. So let me just take the next question here on the list. So the question is, currently if I'm working in a profile which passionates me and management has made a decision to give a promotion which is moving away from my passion, what is to be done in the case? So really what I'm thinking here is, I have an opportunity to get a promotion, but it's away from my area of passion. This is a personal decision you need to make, is what should you do? And in my case, I've made the same decision in the past. I moved away from my area of passion, and I think it's been a mistake. I think in the short term, it might be a good thing to do. But in the long term, what you'll find is really motivates you, to be very productive, to be engaged with your career, to work with people really is your passion. And I'd suggest, in the long term, align your career with the passion. On a day-to-day basis, it might be you need to do things which move away from your passion. But I would say try and constrain that and get back to your passion area as quickly as possible. Let me just take the next question. How do I analyze if I am headed at the right way in my career path, or the right pace in my career path? So I think the key word to me is pace, and what I'm inferring from this question is that, am I moving along fast enough? Very difficult question to answer in general. The one point I would make here is that if you look at career path and pace, different people achieve it differently. And I've seen people who are almost literally on the rocket ship to the top of the companies. I've seen other people who are sort of not being promoted for a long time, and then suddenly they get a big jump in the promotion. It's not a linear situation. And what we find is in your careers is that things can happen very abruptly. And so what I would encourage is, be patient with this. Many people who have been very successful in their careers have sort of languished for many, many years. There are notable stories in industry about this. Be patient, focus on what excites and interests you. And I think in the long term, if you're excited and enthusiastic and productive about what you're doing, you'll find that you're at the right stage of your career. This has certainly been the case for me. Next question is, what are the things that I should consider before switching a company? I think that, the first thing I would suggest here is think about what is causing me to leave my current situation. I think you should be absolutely clear about this and look at, is this really a fundamental situation which I have where I cannot change, where I should consider switching? So I had this question in my career many years ago. And the issue was that I was having a very hard time communicating with my manager and really could not seem to work with him effectively. I felt he was not supporting me. I didn't understand how he worked. And so I had this challenge. This had been very frustrating after about 6 months. So what I ultimately decided to do is I talked to somebody who used to work for him and has since moved on from working from him. And just had a long conversation with that person. Why is my manager this way? Why is he doing this? Why is he doing those things? Why does he have this perspective? And what I found was that actually he just had a different point of view. He valued certain things. He did not value certain things. And once I had been able to reconnect and engage with him in terms of things that he valued and did not value and align myself, we built a very strong working relationship. So really the thing that was compelling me to leave, the situation was not there, and I had an excellent working relationship with him. So what I would suggest, first of all, is really do a lot of very deep introspection on your current situation, understand what is motivating you to leave, and then if it's something that you think you can change, absolutely make an attempt to change it. If you've tried repeatedly and it's just not working to change, then consider switching. Next question is an interesting. Which one is the best choice for a successful manager? To be friendly with the subordinates or to keep some distance from them? So I think I've heard this said on numerous occasions, and part of the challenge of management is maintaining this balance. I think generally you need to have a good relationship with people. You cannot be perceived to be dictatorial. You need to have a good, warm working relationship. But at the end of the day, you need to recognize that you are their manager. And it's difficult to sort of be the same role of friends and managers. So it's been often been said in this type of situation, it's better to be respected than liked. So I think in this case, I would suggest keep the balance in terms of having a good relationship with them, but also recognizing that you are their manager and being careful about getting too friendly. The other risk of getting too friendly with subordinates is that there's a perception that you're playing favorites. And that's a very dangerous thing for the morale of your team. So this next question is around, I've worked in the same technology for 5 years. Is it feasible for me to change technology? Is it advisable? How should I go about doing it? I think the question here is that technology relevant or not? There are certain technologies which still continue to be relevant and grow. Particular technology you mentioned here, I'm not sure. What I would do is get advice from some of your peers or maybe even some of your superiors on whether the technology is current. And if their assessment is that this is going to be a current technology, enhance your skills in that. If what they're finding is that new technologies are emerging, absolutely make a commitment to learn. You can do things such as finding a project that is related to that new technology, taking training classes, but really make the judgment based on, is this technology going to be relevant in the future? So the next question is, I'm still confused after 10 years of experience. Let's leave the company. I think we've discussed this question, and there have been many related questions to this. Okay, so the question here is, I'm working in a services-based ERP consulting world. I currently work in an in-house team that gives me good benefits. I feel my skills are dying and I don't get challenging work. Would you recommend that I work for a consulting company without compromising on pay? I think, again, it's a trade-off. The consulting company, I think, will definitely give you a broader set of experiences if that's what you want. I've also found that in many cases, consulting companies require a lot of work and travel. You need to understand if that's something that is appropriate for your lifestyle. And the ultimate choice is really up to you, is really what you want to do. Honestly, in an early stage of my career, I would actually suggest a consulting company, because what I think it can do is give you the breadth of career, breadth of visibility into what various different companies are doing. It can give you a range of varied perspectives, and it could actually help you identify what you would like to do long term. So in that sense, if you're early in the career, it might be something to consider. So this question is, I'm a middle manager. How much time would be sufficient after joining to ensure you've given a fair chance to the position despite cultural differences and hostile conditions? I don't know if there's a general answer to this. My sense has been that about a year and a half would be an appropriate amount of time to understand what the culture is, what the atmosphere is like. Will give you some time to structure some work to see if you can make a change in the situation. And I think after about a year and a half, if you've done all of those things, I think you've given it adequate time. There's no point really being in a situation for multiple years and sort of not benefiting or taking care of your career. On the other hand, I would not wait until a few months either. So somewhere in general about a year, maybe it could be 9 months, 18 months, but I think about a year is about the right time. So this question is about improving communication skills. My manager has asked me to improve communication skills. Let me know a little bit about that. I hope I made that mistake in my career. Okay, so communication is critical. And in general, all forms of communication are critical, written, verbal. I could say that this is something you should continuously strive to, and it's not just language skills. It's also being very clear and consistent in your nonverbal communications. I had a mentor of mine many years ago say that what is really critical in management is really what is not said and how people observe your actions. And there's a lot of communication in your actions rather than what you say. And I think that's absolutely true. So what I would encourage you to do is, if language skills are what I've discussed here, definitely do those, but also think about the nonverbal communication skills in terms of your behavior, how consistent you are in the treatment of people. All of these things are critical as well. Next question is it a good idea to actively ask for a promotion or wait for somebody to offer it to you? And this one I think I'm pretty clear about. You should always be aggressively pursuing promotions and in an appropriate way presenting your case for getting one. I never advocate waiting for something to come to you. I think it's a very passive activity, and in particular, as you grow more and more senior in a management role, what is implicitly expected of you is taking initiative. So in this case, absolutely, almost sort of without equivocation, what I would say is present yourself for a promotion. If you are going to ask for a promotion, be very grounded and provide examples of what you've done and contributed. Make it an issue of, look, I've demonstrated these skills which are relevant in the new role that I'm asking for, as opposed to saying, I want a promotion. And this was my point earlier in terms of thinking that the promotion precedes the job functions. Try and act in the role that you're trying to get promoted into and use that to provide evidence of your competence. And I think that will serve you well. Let me just move to the next one. 2 questions related to point number 2. Following our passion is not always possible. Many times you don't have time to work on what's available at that point. Once you start working on what you get with your commitment, it's difficult to come out of that. How realistic is number 2 to you? A very good point. And I think you need to think about this in the long term, not the short term. And in the short term, I would absolutely agree with you. We need to do things that may not be relative to our area of passion. Absolutely in agreement. But think of it as long term. And very often in your career, I would expect that you will get to make choices at some point. And just ask yourself, is between these 2 choices, which one am I more passionate about? And help that guide your thinking in the long run. So very good point. In the short term, you're right, you might not be able to do it, but think of it in a long-term perspective. Question 2, good point on this question of missionary versus mercenary. How do you figure it out within an hour of interview time? That's a real challenge. But I think over time, what you can do is you can ask questions that are open-ended about, what really interests you? What have you shown, based on that you've done based on those interests? What is something that you have done outside of your regular work activities? I think it's very interesting also to gain insights into people by asking them what do they do in terms of their outside interests. It gives you a sense of what interests and excite them. The other thing that I do very carefully is when I ask people, I look at their body language. And in many, many cases, you can literally see them light up when they talk about something that they've really done and they're proud of. And you can ask them questions in terms of, what are you most proud of in your career? What did you feel was your real contribution? How did you approach it? And very often, you'll very quickly sense where they have passion and interest. And I think you really need to look for the nonverbal cues, the body language. Are their eyes lighting up? Are they getting animated? Are they showing energy and enthusiasm? All of those are very strong indicators. So look for the nonverbal cues there. So next question here is, how do I initiate a conversation with a manager for a role opportunity that I'm interested in? Very good point. One of the first things you must do is, if the manager is not your manager, tell your manager, your direct manager first. I think that is absolutely critical. You never want to be in a situation where your own manager finds out about it secondhand. Now, it's okay if you are having an informational discussion with somebody else. I think that's fair game. But if you're actually pursuing an opportunity, you should absolutely make your own manager aware of it and aware of the reasons why, and making it an issue of your interest in a particular role or opportunity. So that being said, I think one thing here in having that discussion is just have an informational discussion first of all. Talk to the manager, express an interest, give them a sense of your career and background, what makes you interested in this particular role, understand from them what they see as prerequisites or skills that they would like to see in that role, and then think about highlighting your activities in that area. That's one thing. The second thing you can do, and I've seen this done many times in my career as well, is very often a manager will have like a project where they may need some help on, where you might be able to do some help on, not as a full-time part of your job, but maybe on a part-time basis. Identify those things. It will give you a taste for the new skill. Make sure your own managers agrees that it's appropriate for you to do it. And then that can demonstrate your interest and commitment. I'm always a very strong believer that taking initiative, showing commitment and interest in a new role is one of the strongest ways to get other managers interested in it. So definitely bring about your passion and your interest. Let me just take a little bit of water here. So the next question here is, many times you get in the comfort zone of what you're doing. Those are times when you sort of forget about continued learning. How do you break from the zone? Stretch yourself. I have fallen into this trap many, many times in my career. I've gotten into a new role. It's really stretched me. I've had to think a lot. And then after several months, you kind of figure it out. And then you're just almost going through the motion. So congratulations to you. I think you've recognized that this can happen. And then once you recognize it, I think that's the largest part of the issue. And breaking away from the zone is try and find projects that might stretch you. Try and find learning that might stretch you. Go to a number of managers informationally and say, look, are there some projects where I could help out on a part-time basis, which are outside of your area of expertise, which might encourage you to stretch and develop skills. And I think those are all practices you can try to break away from your comfort zone. Understand what you're really passionate about. See if you can structure some training or a small project in that. And you really use that as an opportunity. Many companies offer actually 10%, 20% time where you're free to work on projects that you've defined on your own. It's not the case in all companies, but if that's the case in your company, that might be another opportunity. Take a project that is unrelated to your work that you're interested in and see if that really excites and stretches you. Next question. Always listening to a manager is described as a mistake. However, in many cases, in a distributed working relationship, it disturbs the working relationship and delays promotions. So my point here was, to not to just avoid listening to your manager, but the point here was don't assume that your manager articulates everything that they want to communicate to you. Very often you have to realize that they're busy, they've got a lot on their mind. They may tell you about what is directly important or relevant to them, but in many cases they may also not tell you certain things. So what I'm suggesting here is probe them, don't necessarily accept what they have as face value. Ask them, look, is there anything else I should be doing? Or what have you seen others do? Ask this question different ways, and I think you'll get a better insight into what their expectations are. So this is a very good point. I'm glad you brought it up. So it's not a question of not listening to your manager, but really probing them further. And that's what I would encourage more. The next question is, do you think in India with salary is one of the biggest concerns, you can get a pay hike without threatening? As there are companies who believe in giving a hike to those who threaten to leave. Very good point. I mean, I don't know what to really say here other than, I mean, if the company that you're working for is one which has a culture where they don't recognize and reward with salary, and they only respond when people threaten to leave, I think the right thing to do is find another role. I mean, if you're in a company which is not recognizing contributions and making sure that people are appropriately compensated for those, it may not be the right one for you long term. It might be the better thing to leave. I mean, if this is a consistent pattern. Because if the behavior is they only respond to threats, I just cannot see that it would be a good prospect in the long term. That's just my honest opinion, not knowing the situation. It's a generalization, but that's just my perspective. Okay, I think we have several more questions here. Hello, I'm working in an outsourced company where the career growth is very limited. So every time in the approval process, the top level manager says that the work is very little. How do you expect some promotions? And because of this, I'm thinking about a career decision. Okay, can you please make some suggestions? I think this is something that, again, as we've discussed it before, what I would suggest is see if there are opportunities to expand the scope of your role. Make an honest effort at it. Try and identify other projects where you could help with on a part-time basis, where you can expand your career skills. But if you made an honest, significant, continuous effort to do this and you're finding you're still getting stuck, it might be you need to move on. And when you do move to your next company, really do ask them a lot of questions in terms of how they support career growth, because that's the primary reason why you're moving. Does an easygoing image at workplace hamper one's professional growth path? I'm not sure how exactly to interpret it easygoing, but what I would say is that one of the things that are very important to me, and also I believe to a lot of other people, is keeping commitments. So it's okay to be friendly. I think really at the end of the day, what is the most important is, have we, in the commitments have we made, have we fulfilled them? So if you can do that in a very friendly and relaxed way, that's great. But if on the other hand, being easygoing means, yeah, I come in and I do what I feel like and maybe things don't get finished on time, I would absolutely discourage that. And that would be a hindrance. So I would worry less about, the image, and I would worry more about, am I making my commitments? Am I being a good partner to other team members? Okay, so I'm just reading this question here for a minute. Okay, the question is that 2 years the team split into operations and tech support. This particular person had been pushed into tech support because of their previous experience. They tried to get into operations but failed. What should be the appropriate next step? So what I would suggest here is something incremental. I think I've made the suggestion numerous times before in this talk. Try and identify, are there areas in operations that you could get involved with, not as your direct position, but in a role. Maybe the approach here is identify certain projects, make contributions, and try and get the operations team to see the value. And it might be that if they see significant value in what you're doing, that they actually, at the appropriate point when an opening comes up, they put you on their list of preferred people to join. I'm not guaranteeing it could work, but I think the idea is what steps could you take right now, and that's what I would suggest. Look for ways to engage and contribute to them in terms of side projects, in terms of specific activities. Get approval from your existing manager. Try and help them. Build good relationships with them. And as best you can, position yourself when the opportunity does open up. I think many times in life, we can never predict when something will open up. But what we can control is being prepared for when it does open up. And maybe perhaps the best thing to do here is think of it in terms of preparation. Okay. I'm just getting into management after some 12 years of experience, and the people management really disturbs me and makes me look into consulting rather than people management. Any advice? Yes, it is very difficult. People management is a very difficult skill, and it's a very different transition from being in a contributor role. You're exposed to a lot of different soft skills. You're dealing with the ambiguities and uncertainties of people. You're dealing with your own behavior, and that can make a lot of people very uncomfortable. I've gone through the same experience early in my career. What I found is, and without knowing you directly, this is a bad generalization, I would suggest just stick with it. I think you can find people management to be an extremely rewarding career. Just focus on the people, being very clear in terms of your priorities and expectations, making sure that they have the right skills to be successful in their roles, clearly identifying what their roles and responsibilities are, providing good direction. And I think the most rewarding times in my career in the people management role has been to see people actually develop in skills and really take on very senior positions. So the most satisfying times have been when people that worked for me got a promotion, got into management themselves, learned that skill, and developed their own careers. Extremely satisfying. So I would suggest in this case, just stick with it. It's a different skill. You don't really get prepared for it by being a single contributor, but I think over time it can be very satisfying. Let me just read this question here. If after working for a couple of years I get to know that this is not my passion, passion is a completely different field which has no relation to my tech education as well, should I go for my passion? You need to answer this question for yourself. As I said before, think of it in the long-term view. Very often what we do for money, we forget about the money relatively quickly. We remember that we're doing things that we really don't want to be doing. I would suggest really think about your passion. If that's your passion in the long term and it's going to satisfy you, pursue it by all means. This next question is, my manager is asking me to complete a project that takes 6 to 7 months and 2 months. How do I handle this situation? One thing I would suggest here is get very detail oriented on it. It's one thing to say, I think it's going to take 6 months, you think it's 2. It's another thing to say, okay, let's take a look at the tasks, the activities, timelines, however you choose to break up the project. Go back to your manager with some well-grounded, well-refined plans which support your 6 to 7 months and see if they then accept that this is in fact a realistic estimate. That's what I would suggest as a very first step. I don't know if you've done that or not, but if you have and it's unrealistic, maybe the next thing to do is ask some of your peers or other people who work with this manager how to communicate that to them. In some cases it might be that perhaps the manager is getting this direction from their superiors. So I don't know the situation. All I would suggest is do a lot of the detailed work to justify and support your estimate. Have that discussion with your manager. Talk to other people that have worked with that manager to see the best way to communicate it to them, and then proceed from that. Okay, let me just go up to the next one. Where do we have to keep our family when we have the choice in selecting our career, when we have the commitment to stay in a job at any cost to fulfill family needs? Again, I think this is a personal trade-off that you would need to make. And I've been in situations where I need to stay in my role because of family commitments. And this is just ultimately a priority you'll have to make in your life. Very difficult for me to give you an answer without knowing where your priorities are. All I'm saying is you ultimately have to decide your priorities to make this decision. Okay, I think we took some of these questions. We just take this one as the next one. How to qualify if one is heading in the right pace. I think we discussed this. Okay, next question is this. Done 10 years of experience as an ERP consultant, currently working as a BA. My question is, will an MBA help? Difficult question to answer, and I've seen people be very successful in business without, and also some with an MBA. The thing I would say here is that many of the skills that are taught in an MBA are things that you can learn on your own, or you can learn without having to go to a full-time MBA program. So maybe one of the things to think about is what exactly is motivating you to get an MBA. If you believe that it is going to help you grow in your career, I wouldn't take that as face value. I would really question that. Because very often what might be a bigger leverage point is your skills. So in general, it's difficult to answer this question, and many people have come back and answered this question. One thing I would suggest is maybe you could take some courses that would expose you to MBA work and get a sense of what you would, how you like that environment. And then in that case, help that guide your decision. But it's a big commitment, particularly if you're thinking of going full-time, or even if you're doing it part-time, it still is a big commitment because it will take you away from your family. So what I would suggest is ask a lot of questions, see if you can take some courses in the subject, and then help that inform your decision. Our next question, what are the things I should consider before switching a company? I think this one we've addressed in different flavors before, so I'll go on to the next one. I think we've answered this one as well. Okay, I think we're just going over some questions we've taken a look at before. Okay, I think many of these, if you just skip through these, I think we've covered many of these. Should nepotism not be curbed completely? I could not agree with you more. Don't know what else to say. It's a reality, unfortunately. And unfortunately, I don't have any real advice on that. I work in a team with flat hierarchies. Everyone is considered a developer. How does one grow in such an environment? With only other chance the team has is presenting solutions built. But this is, in some sense, biased. Also, all customer diversity effectiveness subset too. Not quite sure what the question is, but I think the first part of it is the critical question. Critical piece here is that in a team with flat hierarchy, how do you grow? And I think one point is that just people management is not the only growth dimension. I think you have dimensions of growth in terms of technical skills that we talked about. You also have dimensions of leadership skills in flat hierarchies. In fact, one of the things about flat hierarchies, I would argue, is that management in those structures is actually much more skill, requires much more skill, because you cannot influence with authority. You have to influence with personality, with providing a sense of vision and leadership. And in fact, in many cases, you can actually lead people through power of ideas, through new vision. And there is a way to actually grow without getting into people management responsibility. So I think this is something I would encourage you to do. Career growth does not necessarily mean people management growth. There are other ways to actually demonstrate and develop leadership skills without the people management authority. How should one manage team politics? Difficult question to ask. Politics is a difficult art form. I'll give you one suggestion I gave a manager of mine many years ago when he was faced with this problem of team politics. Read The Political Masters, and the best book of politics to read is The Prince by Machiavelli. Actually, it's a very interesting read. It really is a discourse on political philosophy. It's not about being evil or anything. It's not a very long read, but I think it will give you a sense of what political philosophy is all about. And I would suggest just take a read it carefully, think about how it applies in your work environment, and you might be able to get some good lessons there. The manager I recommended it to absolutely did. Okay, the next question is two functions and under one delivery center, wherein one function has less visibility towards client and one has high client visibility. In this case, both functional managers have the same skill set. How can one succeed who has less client visibility? I think there is, I'm not sure how to exactly interpret or even answer the question. I think ultimately there are valuable contributions both in terms of customer facing as well as doing the back-end work. I don't know if the situation here is, are people more rewarded if they're client facing? I don't know if that's the case or not, so I'm sorry, I'm not able to really answer this question in any more depth without knowing more of the background on it. I'm the CEO of a company which has just started and we have good people within our team. I want to ask, how can I manage them? So I'll give you an example from my career where I had an exceptional general manager who acted like a CEO. And I'll give you an example of specific behaviors, and maybe these are things that you can follow on. Number one thing is he was absolutely clear on his priorities, and he kept his priorities clear, consistent, objectively measurable. So every quarter he would always have on all hands, he would go through his priorities for the quarter and they would be consistent. So that's number one, have a consistent, clear set of priorities. Number two, help your team focus on the priorities. So very often we're asked to do a lot of things. Some are more relevant or less relevant. I would suggest here, absolutely focus on the top priorities. Help your team focus on the priorities. Be open to them coming to you and say, look, I have a question. I don't know whether this is in the priority or not. And then helping them understand they should not be doing certain things and supporting them when they don't. So I think that's, those are the three skills. Number one, be clear on the priorities, consistently communicate, and support your people when they ask for help in terms of how to keep aligned with the priorities. My wife wants to start a career after 4 years of gap due to a family issue. Any suggestions on how to start? On this one, I don't know the answer to this. I don't even have a good answer to this. I'd suggest a couple of different things. One thing is talk to other people that you know who have done this. Maybe they can give you some tips and guidance on this. Another area is to get involved in certain things on a part-time basis and then grow that into a full-time career role. Or maybe if it's an issue in terms of skills, go get some training classes to develop skills and then use that to demonstrate that you have the competence for a new career. In general, this is a difficult question to answer because of the gap. And I think the critical thing here is, to demonstrate that you've acquired new skills that are valuable and then going from there. And I would also suggest get a lot of help from any friends and colleagues you have who've been in that situation. What is overestimating the value of experience? So I think my point here in the discussion, I've discussed it, is don't think about experience in terms of years. Think about it in terms of different experiences. So very often, and my father would tell me this, and I sensed this many times in my career, is that you say you have 15, 20 years worth of experience. In reality, you don't. You've done the same thing for many, many years. And so in reality, you've only had 5 years of experience. It's been repeated 4 times, but it's 5 years. So that's point number one. Point number two is really the value of the experience. So the point is that so many practices in our industry are changing so rapidly that just having chronological experience in terms of number of years may not be that valuable. So let's say if somebody came to you and said, yeah, I have 20 years worth of social media experience. I mean, you would almost laugh at them because the entire social media phenomenon has not really been broadly adopted for more than 10 years. So nobody can have 20 years experience. And so I think you need to think of experience not in terms of chronology, but in terms of relevance in that domain. Thank you. I appreciate it. And I think this is, let me just take a couple of more questions. I think we're going to run out of time. Okay, so somebody here is stuck in their situation. Let me just read this. The question is it wise for me to wait for a company in which candidates is to the camera? Yes, I'm not quite sure what the question is. The question is, what should I do if I'm in university and I want to get into an existing company? I mean, certainly campus selection is the most common cause. I mean, the other thing I would suggest is just networking. And I've known, when I was just finishing college, I've known many people who actually got their positions through networking. Tap into every friend or relation, see if you can actually build up a connection within the companies that you're targeting. Try and meet people in those companies, impress upon them your skills and qualifications, and do a parallel search in conjunction with your university campus recruitment. In the Indian IT industry, how has it been considered remaining as an individual contributor role for a longer time, 15, 20 years? Yeah, I mean, in general, there is the mentality that is most common is that you must be growing in management ranks to be successful in the career. It tends to be the prevailing perception, I believe. But I think there is people are starting to recognize that there can actually be very senior individual contributor roles. And I think in particular, many of the multinational companies are more familiar or comfortable with this concept. And I think that is also starting to get into Indian IT companies as well. So I think it's going to be a slow change. But I would agree with the premise of this question. So the question was the book name about the office politics. It is a book called The Prince. It is written by Niccolo Machiavelli. It was written 500 years ago. I think it's still applicable today. So if you just do a Google search for The Prince by Machiavelli, Machiavelli, I think you should find it. Okay, I think this is the last question here. For a project manager, which skill is more important, people management or technology? Actually, I think project managers, the most important skill is project management. There are different aspects of it, both people and technology management. I would also suggest in this case, and talk to your peers on this, I think something like a PMP certification is important and valuable as well. So I think we are at the end of our time and the end of the questions. So unless the moderator has any other actions, I'll just thank you very much for your time and attention. This has been some very good questions, and I am happy to have had the opportunity to help you think through some of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we can conclude the session. Though we have several other questions, but we are running out of time, and we can take those questions offline.
Okay, so shall I end the session?
Thanks, Mr. Krishnan, for your informative session of 10 mistakes of my career. It was indeed an enlightening session. I would also like to thank all participants for their support in making this webinar a huge success. The recording of this webinar will be available on TechGig.com by tomorrow. Gentlemen, the next session on TechGig webinars is happening today at 5 p.m. Topic for the webinar is Chicken Soup for the CRM Soul. We will be having Mr. Dinesh Chandrasekhar, Director, CRM and MDM Practice at Hitachi Consulting India as a guest speaker. So see you all at 5 p.m. Thank you.